Welcome back to Bay Sunday, 1963, a year that changed America from Dr. Martin Luther King's March for Civil Rights on Washington. Alabama Governor George Wallace bringing in his battle cry of segregation now, and of course the assassination of our President John Kennedy. Three men that shaped the world we live in a year that will live on for many, many years. Our next guest examines those 365 days of 1963 through the eyes of those three men in his new book, 1963, The Year of Hope and Hostility. Pleased to welcome the pastor of the Resurrection Community Church in Berkeley and a noted columnist, Byron Williams. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. Well, in your book and some of the reviews and such, you call 1963 the second revolution. Tell us why.
Well, I think, especially in the context of civil rights, I think that the civil rights movement must be understood as a continuation of the American Revolution. The preamble says, "We the people," and the civil rights movement in the 20th century is examining that question: who exactly comprises the we? So the civil rights movement is that second American Revolution based on those ideas found in the Declaration of Independence and as well as the Constitution.
You and I were born in the same year, and I think of 1963, and immediately you think of Kennedy, November 22nd, the day he was assassinated. But so much more happened prior to that. But Kennedy is one of the men that you wrap your book around.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Well, I think we started with the Kennedy assassination, and I think that's probably the reason my book is one of the first to examine the year in its entirety. The Kennedy assassination, which is the only event of '63 I actually remember, takes up all the oxygen in the room. And as a result of that tragedy, we have looked at these other events sort of a la carte. And we've not looked at the interconnected nature of these events, because the civil rights movement is connected to the Cold War, Cuba, Vietnam. I mean,
Berlin.
It's Berlin. It's all interrelated. But we've looked at these things a la carte simply because the Kennedy assassination was just so big.
Dr. Martin Luther King, just recently, we had the anniversary of I Have a Dream speech, 50 years. You brought up a very good point. He was an amazing orator, an incredible leader, but maybe one of his best attributes, he was a great listener.
Absolutely. I think that the great oratory caused us to miss that. And it was only when, by interviewing some of his aides who are still alive, and in particular Jack O'Dell, really pressed that point with me. In fact, where King's listening skills really become apparent was after he was arrested in Birmingham in April of '63. James Bevel, one of his aides, had this idea: let's have the children involved in the march. And it's like, whoa, we can't do that. Not with the veracity of Bull Connor. We can't have children. But King heard this, and it made sense. And when they put the children out on the march, ages 6 to 18, Bull Connor, it didn't matter what age you were, Bull Connor still pulled the police dogs and fire hoses out, but television caught it.
TV, really, because we'd heard about it, but we were finally seen.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you mentioned earlier that I looked through the lens of Kennedy, King, and Wallace. If they are the three protagonists, television is 3A. Yeah. This is sort of television's coming out party. You know, one of the small things, but a big thing nevertheless, is that '63 was the year television went from 15 minutes to a half hour. And then by the time the Kennedy assassination, it's our first glimpse of round-the-clock news coverage. So that really had a big impact.
You had a good message here, too, because right after what was happening in Alabama with the television coverage and such, the civil rights movement was on the minds of the American public 4%. And like the next day, it was over 50%.
It was 52% of Gallup poll the next day, because it's one thing to hear about it, but it's another when you see it. Yeah. And so this became the way we started to get our news. And by the time we had the Kennedy assassination, we became very dependent on television, and the rest, as they say, is history.
How do you write a book? You were born in '59. I was born in '59.
Thank you for outing me.
Well, I outed myself, too. Let's do the math. How do you write a book about three men that have passed away? Is that tough? I mean, and some of their close friends have since passed too, so that must have been tricky.
Well, it is and it isn't, because really these three men were the protagonists, but the book is event-driven. And so I write about the events, and then I write about the interrelated nature of the events. And so they become, the players in these events. But when you focus it on the events, and I would say that I also had the fortune, 50 years is just long enough where some of these people still survived. And the very first person that sat down with me was Kennedy's former speechwriter, Ted Sorensen. And so he was one of the first people. So I got a great inside view of President Kennedy. Jack O'Dell, who Kennedy told King he had to fire if he was going to support a civil rights bill, 90 years old last month, still around to talk to me. James Lawson, who wrote the foreword to my book, taught everyone nonviolent civil disobedience in Birmingham, still around. So I still had some resources that I could draw on as well.
Well, the book is just about to come out. It's fabulous, and I want to thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. If you'd like more information about Byron's book, log on to 1963hopeandhostility.com. That's 1963hopeandhostility.com. Back with more Bay Sunday right after the break.